Chapter 26. Hope you've had a lovely day. They couldn't wait to pack up and find the first cavern with a water pool to try out the idea. First, they made a longer-lasting torch fire, using special sap which Harriet had brought, spread onto wrapped-up strips of clothes they'd sacrificed. Harriet took charge of marking their way by arranging small stones into the shape of arrows at the entrance so that they would be able to find their way back. They made their way through several tunnels before they entered a huge cavern. It took Arthur's breath away. Great roses rose from the floor, and enormous stalactites loomed above. Thousands of tiny blue lights illuminated the cave ceiling. It was like entering a magical underground world. "What is it?" he breathed. In a ripple, the light vanished, leaving the glow of their torch fire. Harriet thought for a moment. "Just let me put the torch back around the corner. If these are what I think—" As she did, the light from the torch fire faded. Slowly, the lights above pricked back to life. "I think they're tiny creatures, like those found in the caves of the mountains of the second continent, glowworms." "Extraordinary," said Felicity. "But how would they survive in here?" Maudie asked. The soft flow of water rippled musically through the cave. "There's probably some thermal activity deep within the mountain. They are like active minerals and tiny creatures in the water for the glowworms to feed on." It was amazing, as though they had found a secret life system. The thrill of it tingled inside Arthur, making him forget everything that had happened. All that existed was this wonderful place and the feeling that they were glimpsing something no one had before, as though nature had given them a secret pass. "It's a privilege, isn't it?" Harriet said. She patted him gently on the shoulder. "We'd better try out our theory," Maudie said. Arthur took off his jacket and unhitched his iron arm, while Harriet retrieved the torch fire. "It's a bit different to a pin," Felicity said, "but hollow. It should float, and it will always point towards the magnetic south," Maudie said. "But how?" Harriet asked. "I magnetized the arm when I made it, as I thought it would be useful for picking things up." "You are a very surprising pair," Harriet laughed. "Come on, what are you waiting for?" said Felicity, shuffling her feet. Maudie placed the iron arm in the still pool, away from the flowing stream. They waited for a painful moment while nothing happened. Slowly it began drifting around until it settled with the pointed finger to the left of the cavern. "Well, it looks like it's that way," said Maudie. She retrieved the arm, and they chose the most southerly tunnel. They went onwards through the ancient lava tubes until they found the next cavern with a pool, always keeping as southerly as they could. Onwards they went, for chime after chime, through the mountain, losing track of time and direction, putting all their trust in the iron arm. But Perinthna grew more agitated as they went on, landing in front of them and frantically flapping her wings. Not being able to see the sky must be bothering her. "Do you think there's much further to go?" Arthur said. "Well, I know how she feels," Harriet said. She certainly wasn't at ease inside the mountain, cringing at the sight of the smaller tunnels and sweat beading on her brow. "I've never liked being penned in either," she said. When they entered a vast cavern, Felicity sat herself down on a large flat rock. "I could do with taking the weight off my feet for a while. I feel like we've been walking day and night. I miss the sun." "I don't miss the cold. At least it's warmer in the mountain." Maudie took off another layer and tied it around her waist. "There's no way to tell how far we have to go, I'm afraid. Let's set up camp for a break, and I'll go on a little to check," said Harriet. They set down their packs and rested while Harriet went to check ahead. Perinthna had disappeared high in the cavern and refused to come down, no matter how much Arthur called her and tried to tempt her with a slither of dried fish. Eventually he gave up and took out his expedition journal. It seemed like a dream. The fact that he was in the middle of a mountain in the far reaches of the third continent. Maudie and Felicity had a snooze, while Arthur wrote the most recent events in his explorer's journal. But he kept thinking back to what had happened to the Victorious, and when Endora had said, and what Endora had said. He shut the book and looked towards the end of the cave. Although Harriet had promised not to go far, she had been ages. Impatient, Arthur walked to the tunnel and peered inside, just as the light of the torch flame appeared somewhere at the other end. "Arthur, is that you? You made me jump." She looked tired and her brow was deeply furrowed. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Do you think we might be nearly at the other side?" She nodded, although for some reason he felt there was more. "It's only a few tunnels away, as I suspected," she said. As they walked back, Harriet didn't speak, and Arthur kept glancing sideways at her, trying to work out what was the matter. "Perhaps we should wake the others," he said. "I can't wait to get back outside, even if it is deathly cold out there." "Yes, me too, but let them sleep a while." They sat warming their hands by the embers still glowing where their small fire had been. "What is it, Harriet? You look worried about something. Did you see something on the other side? Did you see Endora?" She shook her head. No. Now get a little sleep before we set off." Arthur lay down, drifting in and out of broken sleep. He was woken by whispers between Felicity and Harriet. A single candle flickered between them. "You've got to tell them," Felicity said. "I know, I just want them to be rested before they hear." "Why, what is it?" Arthur said, sitting up. The two women looked at each other with silent resignation. Then Felicity gently shook Maudie awake. After a few awkward false starts, Harriet took a breath. "I'm so sorry, you two. I went further on in the tunnels and I found your father." The twins gaped at her, not understanding. "I mean to say, I found his frozen body?" The words were punched to his chest. Harriet took something from her bag and handed it to Arthur. It was a diary with the Brightstorm moth emblazoned on the front. His throat constricted, as though it was being squeezed by a great vice. He must have made it to the mountain after his crew was poisoned. He almost made it through, but he died in an ice cave not far from here, Harriet said sadly. Arthur looked up to the rocks where Perentha perched. Perentha knew. That's why she's been so agitated. She remembers this place. "It's only confirming what you already knew deep down, Twinnies," Felicity said, sitting between them and holding them tight as they cried. They sat that way for some time. Then Harriet relit the small fire, and Felicity took cups from her backpack and tea leaves from her small purse. She added dried milk and several spoons of honey to each cup. She didn't talk. She didn't try to tell them that it would make everything better, although as they sat there sipping the warm, sweet taste of home, it made the awfulness of reaching that point not quite as terrible. After a while, Arthur roused himself and picked up his dad's diary. He ran his fingers over the cover, then opened it. Inside were mostly calculations and coordinates, but as he turned the page, there were accounts confirming what their evidence had taught them about the poisoning. "Would you be able to read some to us, Arthur?" Harriet asked. Arthur nodded. He swallowed hard and began to read. "I should have known there is no such thing as goodwill when it comes to Endora Vane. A member of her crew brought the cakes, the likes of which the crew had not had in many weeks. Looking back, I curse myself for not realizing. The crew fell mortally ill. There was nothing I could do. Dr. Salmon was the first to go. There was no remedy to starve the poison. It worked swiftly, and they had perished within the time. I took them to the forest edge and dug the frozen earth to make as best graves for each crew member as I could, knowing the Vane crew would soon return, and I wasn't safe. From the forest I watched them come to the Violetta, steal our pitch, and begin their search for the missing crew. I skirted the edge, hoping I could at some point make it back to the Violetta, as I had barely any supplies on me, but I was seen." Arthur paused. "Are you all right?" Harriet said. Felicity put an arm around him, and Maudie took the diary and continued. "I was shot at and surrounded. The only route left for me to run was across the unstable lake towards the mountains. It is a miracle I made it. They took flight in the Victorious and shot cannons at me when I was almost at the mountain. The cannon fire set off an avalanche, destroying a huge section of the lake. I reached the mountain edge just before the rockfall, and although the mountain seemed impenetrable, at that last moment I saw a small cave entrance and scrambled to it just in time. I am sure Endora believed I had been crushed in the avalanche. I heard the Victorious's engine as they searched the mountains for a way through until they finally faded. Despicable woman, and it confirms that the story about the fuel being stolen is a lie, Harriet said. She was forced to give up and return to Longtown, said Arthur. Maudie passed the diary back to Arthur. There's a little more. Will you read the last bit? I am lost deep in the caves. The little fuel I had on me for the torch flame is nearly exhausted, and my pencil is worn to its end. My undying hope is that someone finds my diary and brings justice for my crew. The burning fury I have for Endora is fueled by my one regret that I will never get to see my beloved children grow into the marvellous adults I know they will be. And if this journal is found, my last wish is that they know my love is eternal. The writing faded. The last words barely scratched into the page. You wouldn't last long being stuck here without supplies. Poor Dad, Maudie said, tears welling once more. Perintha flew from the ceiling and landed before Maudie. She hopped onto Maudie's arm and butted her head to her cheek. Maudie gasped in amazement. She's never done that to me before. It's usually you, Artie. The great white hawk looked at Arthur. There was such a sense of knowing in her eyes. Perintha had always carried the truth of what had happened to Dad, and Arthur understood that at that moment Maudie needed Perintha's comfort more than he did. And she made it back to us, Maud. Without her bringing back the necklace, maybe we'd never have doubted Endora's story. That's some bird, said Felicity, and Perintha's screech filled the cavern as though releasing the burden she'd carried. After a while they knew it was time to move on. They packed up and carried onwards. That was a bit sad, wasn't it? See ya, bye.